If you've not started your podcast because you think podcasting is expensive, then this one is for you. A lot of people think podcasting is expensive, but today I'm going to show you how to start a podcast on a budget in under $100. If you want to get your show started without breaking the bank, then listen up. Hello and welcome to another video. This is Dilip, and today we are going to talk about a very important aspect in podcasting. It is the cost implications with podcasting. There are a lot of people who think that podcasting is extremely expensive, and that's why they don't start, because they see all of these jazzy microphones, the sound mixers, and they feel that there is a lot of investment that has to go into starting a podcast. But that is not true. You can start a podcast in less than $100 on a budget. And today I'm going to show you how to start your podcast in less than $100. So let's get started. Hello and welcome back. I'm Dilip. If you don't know me, then I'm a blogger, podcaster, and affiliate marketer. And today we're going to talk about a very important aspect of podcasting. It is the cost implications associated with podcasting. Now, there are a lot of people who think that podcasting is extremely expensive, that they have to spend a lot of money to get started with their podcast. And that is primarily because of all of the jazzy microphones that they see, the audio mixers, the digital audio workstations, which is basically the audio editors, and a lot of things that some of the top podcasters show off, which makes them believe that there is a lot of cost involved in getting started with your podcast. But that's not true. You can start off with your podcast on a budget in less than $100. And I'm talking about good top quality podcast in less than $100. I'm going to show you everything step by step today. So watch along and see how you can get your podcast started in less than $100. So let's get started. Now, the first and the most important thing is the basic equipment that you will need. Now, you all know that podcasting requires some basic equipment, like for example, a microphone, and you might also think that you will need an audio mixer. Otherwise, how are you going to plug in your microphone to your computer and record your audio? And then you will need some of the other associated equipment. But the truth is that you don't actually need all of these. You can start off with a good microphone. That is the basic and the most essential part of starting a good podcast. You can start off with a good microphone and a boom arm like the one that you're seeing in this video. That's all that is needed. The truth is that you don't need a microphone that costs you $500. You can get started with less than $100. What are the recommended microphones? Now, the microphone that I'm using is a Samson Q2U. Now, the audio quality of this microphone is not less than any of the top microphones out there. You can do some bit of editing and give a pop to your sound. That is all that is needed. And this microphone doesn't cost you more than about $60 to $70. So this is a microphone that I would recommend that you get started with for your podcast. You'll be able to find a link to this microphone in the description box below. Go ahead and start off your podcast with this microphone. Now, there is another microphone that a lot of podcasters use, which is the Audio-Technica ATR 2100X, which is very similar to the Samson Q2U. There is no difference from an audio perspective between these two microphones. The only difference is in the brand and the make, but I can tell you that the build quality of Samson Q2U is much better than that of the Audio-Technica ATR 2100X, which is also something that I have. If you're somebody who likes the Audio-Technica, you'll be able to go ahead and check that microphone out. The link is again there in the description box below. Go ahead and check it out. Now, you can pick one of these two microphones. The Audio-Technica is slightly costlier than the Samson Q2U. The Samson Q2U is available for around $60 to $70, whereas the Audio-Technica will be available for about $90 to $95. If you don't want to spend that kind of money, then you can always get started with a wired lavalier microphone. There are a lot of wired lavalier microphones out there, which are all good microphones that will capture your audio really well. I'll put links to a few in the description box below. You can go ahead and check them out. These microphones also do really well, and it doesn't cost you more than $20 to $30. But I would recommend going in for the Samson Q2U or the Audio-Technica 2100X. And the reason why I'm saying that is because the Audio-Technica and the Samson Q2U is a microphone which has both an XLR option and a USB option. Now, when you're getting started, you don't want an audio mixer and some of the other associated equipments. So if you have a microphone that has a USB option, then all you need to do is just plug in the microphone to your computer directly and you can get started with your podcast. And the best part is that these microphones microphones are scalable, which means that if tomorrow you grow your podcast and you want to buy in an audio mixer and then do some of the mixing that some of the top podcasters do, like for example, audio effects, sounds, and all of that, you can still do that because these microphones have the XLR capability. You can plug them into your audio mixer and record your podcast. That is why I would recommend that you go with either the Samson Q2U or the Audio-Technica ATR 2100X, because these two are the best microphones out there. Now, something that you might want to keep in mind is that when you're going for these microphones, you should also go for a boom arm, which is not very costly. You'll be able to get them for about $10 to $15. A boom arm helps ensure that your microphone doesn't capture the shocks. A boom arm along with a shock mount, it doesn't capture the shocks and there is no audio disturbance. But these microphones usually come with a desktop stand, which is also good. You will have to do some bit of editing to remove any disturbances if at all it is there. But otherwise, I would recommend that you go for a boom arm. Now, along with the boom arm, you can also go for a pop filter, but microphones usually come with a sponge filter, which should be good enough. But if you want to go a little bit higher and upgrade yourself, you can always go with a pop filter, which again, I'll leave a link in the description box. So that's basically the equipment that you will need. Now, if you're somebody who would like to monitor your audio while recording your podcast, you can always do that. For that, you can always go for a closed back headphone, which again will cost you around $100. So I wouldn't recommend that if you're getting started. But if you're somebody who wants a headphone to get started, then you can always go for that. I'll leave a link in the description box below. So that's all that you will need for the equipment. Now, coming to the recording software. Now, for the recording software, there are a lot of software out there. Like for example, there are software that are paid, there are software that are free. But if you're getting started with your podcast, I would recommend going with some of the top quality free software out there. You don't need a paid software to record your audio and edit. Now, two of the software that I would recommend, if you're on a Windows, you can go with Audacity, which is one of the best audio recording software out there, user friendly, very easy to use. I've created a few tutorials which will show you how to go about using Audacity. I leave those links in the description box below. You can go ahead, click that and check out the tutorials how to use Audacity to record your podcast. Now, if you're on a Mac, you can always go with GarageBand, which is again a very good software, very powerful software onto which you can record your podcast. But if you don't want to use either of these, you can always go with Reaper, which is again a free software that is available out there. You can always download it, use it and record your podcast. So you don't need to pay for any software to record your audio. I hope you're enjoying this video until now. If you are, then do consider subscribing to this channel, because on this channel I share a lot of valuable, helpful and simple podcasting tips that can help you get started with your podcast and make money from your podcast. So if you're new here, then please do consider subscribing to this channel and don't forget to hit the bell notification so that you stay updated with all of the latest videos that I release. And I have a free course on how to get started with your podcast. So if you're new to podcasting and want to get started with your podcast, you can consider joining this course. It's a 10-day e-course on how to get started with your podcast. You'll be able to find a link in the description box below. Now, the third is the podcast hosting. Now, when it comes to podcast hosting, a lot of the top podcasters recommend some of the premium podcast hosting companies like that of Podbean or Buzzsprout or Blueberry. Now, all of these podcast hosting companies are amazing. They give you a lot of features for the money that they charge, but they are all still premium. You might have to pay them to get started, and it's a monthly subscription. But if you're getting started and if you're not sure if podcasting is really for you and you want to check if that is something that you want to continue in the long term, then I would recommend going with a free podcast hosting company and then upgrading to a premium podcast hosting. Now, there are two options that you have. One is Spotify for podcasters, which is the erstwhile Anchor. Anchor was changed to Spotify for podcasters, which is a very powerful podcast hosting company, and they don't charge. They are free for life. So you can always get started with them. They give you a lot of features, and in fact, your podcast is automatically distributed to Spotify as well. But I use Acast and I recommend Acast because Acast has the option of getting started for free and then upgrading to a premium option. Now, the difference between free and premium is practically nothing in Acast, except that you will get some added features and some additional monetization options when you pay for it. But otherwise, pretty much all features are available in the free option in Acast, and you also get some basic monetization option as well. So you can always get started for free on Acast and then go about upgrading to the premium plan once you've established yourself as a podcaster. I leave a link for both of these in the description box below. You can go ahead and check them out if you're interested in going with them. Now that the three primary things are out of the way, let's discuss the last 2 points, which is one, the content strategy, and the second is a promotional strategy. Now, when you're starting off a podcast, the most important aspect is your content strategy. The equipment just doesn't matter. If your content doesn't provide value to your audience, then irrespective of how much ever expensive equipments you use to get started with your podcast, it doesn't matter. Your podcast is not going to be listened to. So I would recommend putting in some thought into creating your content strategy. Who your audience is, what are their pain points, what are the problems that you are trying to solve, and what are your experiences that you're going to use to solve those problems for them. Identify these aspects and create your content that provides a lot of value to your listeners. That is the only way that people are going to listen to your podcast. So instead of putting a lot of thought and brain into acquiring top quality, jazzy looking equipment, I would recommend that you put some thought into your content strategy, because that is what is going to be the most important aspect in the long run. Now, I would recommend that you don't look at some broad topics and create a podcast around it. Look for some niche topics, because it'll be less competitive and you will get a decent audience for it, and there will be a fan base that you'll be able to build for your content. So I would recommend looking for niche topics to create your podcast. Coming to the fifth and the last part, which is promotional strategy. Now, what good is a podcast if you don't have listeners, right? So you have to promote your podcast in order to get listeners. And how do you promote your podcast? There are a lot of people who recommend running ads for promotion, but when you're getting started, I wouldn't recommend running ads. I wouldn't recommend spending any money on running ads. Instead, use organic traffic generation methods to generate traffic to your podcast. And one of the most prominent ones is to use some of these social media channels. So I would recommend getting started with 1 or 2 at the max social media channels. Identify social media channels where most of your audiences are, and then promote your podcast on those channels. So even before you start your podcast, I would recommend that you put together a launch plan. And if you're not sure what a launch plan is, I have put together a free podcast launch checklist. I'll leave a link in the description box below. You can go ahead, click on that link, download this podcast launch checklist. It has everything that you will need to get started with your podcast launch. So go ahead and download that checklist. Now, when you're starting off with your podcast, you might want to do some pre-wiring, some pre-launch to let people know that you're going to launch a podcast around this topic, so that you're able to build some anticipation for your podcast. And once you have some initial audience, promote your podcast on these social media channels. Like what I said, pick 1 or at the max 2, not more than that, because you don't want to spend a lot of time on these social media channels trying to promote your podcast. Because if you pick more than 2, you might just burn yourself out in trying to promote these podcasts. So I would recommend picking at the most maybe about 2 odd channels on which you'll be able to promote your podcast, and then put together a consistent promotional strategy. Be there every day or whatever is a comfortable frequency for you, and promote your podcast regularly, consistently on these channels, and you should be able to build an audience slowly. I would also recommend looking at some organic search discovery. I've put together an episode where I talk more about it. I'll leave a link in the description below. You can go ahead and check out that episode, because there I share a lot of tips on how to get your podcast ranked on search engines and on some of these podcast directories. So that is another way using which you'll be able to get your podcast discovered. So that's all that you will need. You don't need to spend any money on advertisements to promote your podcast and build a listenership. Now, these are all natural methods, so it will take some time for you to build an audience for your podcast. But what I would recommend is not looking at how your podcast is doing in terms of the downloads or the listens. Put your content out there. Until and unless you have about 15 to 20 episodes out there, you're not going to be able to build a listenership unless you're somebody who already has a huge following or you're an influencer. So go ahead, put in the effort, create those episodes, stay consistent, and you should be able to build an audience slowly and steadily. And when you're doing all of this, don't forget to engage with your listeners, ask for reviews, ask for testimonials, talk to them about what they would like to listen from you. These are all things that will help you create further content for your podcast. So ensure that you are continuously engaging with your listeners. So to sum it up, you've seen that you don't need thousands of dollars to get started with your podcast. You can get started with your podcast for less than $100, maybe only about $60 to $70 odd. And it is not going to compromise anything in terms of your audio quality or your content quality. Everything is going to be top notch, even if you don't spend thousands of dollars on getting started with your podcast. So if you've been putting off launching your podcast because you think that podcasting was expensive, then it is time to get started with your podcast. And if you want some basic guidance on how to get started with your podcast, you can always join my free podcasting course, which is the 10-day e-course where I teach you everything that you need to know about getting started with your podcast. You'll be able to find a link in the description box below. Go ahead, click the link and join the free course that will teach you how to get started with your podcast. So that's all that I have for today. If you have any questions, you can drop them in the comments below and I will respond to all of that. And if you like this video, then don't forget to hit the thumbs up button, because that way others will be able to find this video. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit the bell notification so that you stay updated with all of the latest videos that I release. That is all that I have for today. I'll be back again the next week with another interesting video around podcasting. Until then, keep watching. This is goodbye from Dilip.